The Machines of War are an incredible addition to your team when you're looking to maximize your damage output, as well as adding a really interesting bunch of mechanics that can seriously turn the tide of battle in your favour. Today we'll take a look at how to unlock them, level them, and then use them in the best way possible. The Machines of War have slowly been added to the game, and at the time of this video, we are already up to 7 of them, and each has added a really unique set of skills that change how you play offensively and defensively. Eventually, Snowprint, the developers of Tacticus, are looking to add one to each faction, but for now, the ones we have so far are Tson'ji, an XV-88 broadside battlesuit of the Tau Empire that disables enemy machines of wars and adds marker lights to enemies. Plagueburst Crawler is a demon engine of the Death Guard that adds contamination to battlefield hexes and suppresses enemies. Exorcist is an artillery tank of the Adeptus Sororitas that buffs friendly targets attacking enemies standing on hexes that are on fire, as well as buffing the Adeptus Sororitas faction members in general. Malleus rocket launcher is a field ordnance battery of the Astra Militarum that summons Cadian guardsmen onto the battlefield and also suppresses enemies. Galatian is a Redemptor dreadnought of the Ultramarines that can deploy to the battlefield as a stationary summon. Biovore is an artillery organism of the Tyranids that summons spore mines onto the battlefield. And Forgefiend is a demon engine of the Black Legion that sets battlefield hexes on fire. And alongside these interesting capabilities, they also deal serious amounts of damage to your enemies, and all of this together makes them an incredible support unit for your team. They always begin the battle being stationed off at the edge of the map and are unable to move or be attacked like a normal unit, but of course you can use their abilities to impact the ongoing battle. Each Machine of War has 2 abilities, a primary and a secondary, and the primary is always an active ability that requires consumable munitions to use. The secondary ability is always free to use. Either ability can be subject to an initial cooldown before it can be used, and most of them are limited in this way, as we'll find out. When we're talking about munitions, this is a consumable resource that can be spent to use the primary ability of the Machine of War, and you can see how many you have available by looking at this part of your screen. There is a limit to how many munitions a player can stockpile, and it does have a maximum amount you can stockpile in total. There are many ways to get munitions, but mostly you'll get enough each week to keep you blasting without worrying too much about this, unless you're really being reckless with them. To unlock Machines of War, you play an event called an Incursion. This is a monthly recurring event that lasts 5 days and recurs every 5 weeks. Around every 10 weeks, a new Machine of War is added into the mix. At the beginning of each incursion, you choose which Machine of War's unlock progression you want to pursue for that event, and each of the available machines is presented with their abilities available for review. There's a confirmation screen before your choice is final, and once you choose your machine, you're locked into that choice for the duration of the event, but can choose the same or different machine at the next incursion. The choice of machine then determines which alliance's characters you can use in the event, as the battles are fought against the machine's specific faction that you've picked, and you can see who the opponents are and who you can use on screen now. Each incursion attempt is called a run, and that requires spending a token and allows you to challenge a specific tier. You start with 2 tokens and can hold a maximum of 3 tokens, and tokens regenerate at 1 every 20 hours, so that's 1.2 per day, and you can functionally use 7 tokens across the duration of the event. The incursion itself consists of a bunch of battles separated by a branching map. Each time you have a battle, you can choose from different options: normal battles and difficult battles, and if you want to complete all the battles and get all the rewards from a tier, you have to run it multiple times. At regular intervals through the map, you get chests with components which are used to level Machines of War up, and character shards for the Machines of War you've chosen. You also have enhancement nodes that give you a choice of how to buff your team for this run specifically. This can include resurrecting your dead characters, giving them traits they don't normally have, adding summons to your side for the battle, and many more options. Resurrecting your dead characters are important because damage and death is carried forwards through each run. That means any damage you take in one battle will still be there at the start of the next battle, and any friendly characters who die are unable to be chosen for the next battle. That makes it quite a strategic choice of when to take damage, who should take damage, and quite frankly, a healer is thoroughly recommended for the event. Once you beat a battle, you can raid it again to get a small amount of gold and to progress higher up the branches without taking damage that you normally would while playing a battle. Finally, an important note that players often miss: you can start at any tier you like, and the higher tiers always have more rewards than the lower tiers. That means you don't need to grind through every tier and can skip the lower ones if you feel ready for a higher challenge. When we look at leveling machines of war, they have stars and a rarity, just like other characters. They can be promoted and ascended with shards and orbs as normal, and shards are earned through playing incursion, and, like characters, can drop from requisitions. Machines all start at common rarity, and their ability levels are capped by rarity just like characters. Ability levels can be increased with a combination of upgrades, badges, forge badges, salvage, and components, but unlike characters, they don't require experience. And talking about components, these are a unique upgrade resource for machines of war. They come in Imperial, Xenos, and Chaos varieties, and they're similar to badges and orbs, but they do not have an associated rarity. They are spent when leveling abilities, and components can be gained in various ways, including through the incursions themselves. Finally, each machine of war has one extra locked skill that you can see here. This is unlocked when they reach mythic rarity, but I'm not going to talk too much about this in this video because it's a beginner video. However, you can see what each machine of war has on screen currently. The only real thing I'm going to talk about this is that it's a very small buff to each machine of war, usually around 10 to 20% offense or 10 to 20% defense, depending on how many rarity stars you have. Here you can see the skills as soon as you open them up at 10% of the equivalent. That means these skills are really the cream at the top of your team, and not something that you should be worrying about or aiming for until much later in your Tacticus career, but I feel it would be rude not to mention them regardless. Just before we move on to the machines of war themselves and look a bit deeper into how each one functions, here's an offer to earn some free blackstone to help you on your way. You can use my Referral Code in-game today to get 100 free blackstone. Just note, you can only use one person's Referral Code, so it's always best to just swap with one of your friends rather than using mine, but the offer's there if you want it. We'll start with Shazvre Viorla Tson'ji, who is an XV-88 broadside battlesuit of the Tau Empire faction. In lore, broadside battlesuit teams annihilate everything that falls within their sights. Each battlesuit is an indomitable slab of high-tech armor, while their iconic heavy rail rifle and other long-range weaponry can make short work of even the toughest enemy units. And Tson'ji's primary ability is a heavy rail rifle. This uses one munition and has an initial cooldown of 1 round. Then it can be used every round. This has 2 parts to it: aiming at characters and aiming at other machines of war. After they've aimed at a character, then at the beginning of Tson'ji's next turn, they're going to fire at it. They will fire at it, dealing 2 piercing damage attacks that have a 80% pierce ratio. Any damage dealt to vehicles or characters with a big target trait increased by 75%. However, an important point here is that the damage is reduced by 30% for each hex the target has traversed during its last turn to a minimum of 0 damage. If you're playing against Tson'ji, you can just run away and you'll take 0 damage from his hit. When they aim at a machine of war, they increase its secondary ability by 1 round and have a chance to increase its primary ability by 1 round. Their secondary ability, Twin Smart Missile System, needs to be activated but has no cooldown and can be used every round. This targets an enemy on the battlefield and deals 3 blast damage hits to each enemy unit that has a marker light. Marker lights just increase the amount of damage that a Tau Empire character does with ranged attacks. That blast damage has a 15% pierce ratio, and if the enemy unit that you targeted doesn't have a marker light, then it doesn't get shot at, but it will receive a marker light for the next 2 rounds, so you can follow up on it next time. Tson'ji is really only useful with Tau characters. Get them to spread marker lights across as many different characters as you can before using your secondary ability, and aim at big targets or Sygex, the only vehicle character in the game currently, to maximize damage with your primary ability. Plagueburst Crawler is a demon machine of the Death Guard faction. In lore, the brainchild of Mortarion himself, the Plagueburst Crawler is a hulking and extremely resilient demon engine. Equipped with Plagueburst mortars, they launch hideously powerful explosive shells that unleash clouds of corrosive spores upon detonation. And their primary ability is entropy cannons, and it costs 1 munition and has no cooldown and can be used every round. It targets an enemy unit that has their armor reduced or is within a friendly contagion aura. The contagion aura comes from being near the stench of the Death Guard characters, and this deals 2 energy damage hits to the target, which have a 30% pierce ratio. Their secondary ability is Plagueburst Mortar, and this has an initial cooldown of 1 round and then can be used every round after that. It targets a hex on the battlefield, and all enemies on that hex or adjacent hexes that also have their armor reduced or are within the friendly contagion aura take 3 toxic damage hits and become suppressed for 1 round. The toxic damage does 70% pierce ratio. This also then adds contamination to the target hex and random hexes around it, and this contamination lasts for 2 rounds, and if someone stands on it, then their armor is reduced, although it doesn't affect mechanical or Death Guard characters themselves. Get at least 2 of your Death Guard characters into range to maximize the reduction of armor from the contagion aura. Make sure to use the Plagueburst Mortar before your friendly character attacks, because it will mean the armor of enemies is stripped back and they take more damage. And ground contamination can't affect mechanical characters like Admechs, Necron, or some of the orcs, so don't be surprised there. Exorcist is an artillery tank of the Adeptus Sororitas faction. In lore, every flurry of notes performed by the Exorcist's artillerist loads and targets thrice blessed rocket volleys to bombard the enemy. More than artillery tanks, Exorcists are mobile shrines to the magnificence of the Emperor that project inspirational battle canticles. And the primary ability is Thrice Blessed Conflagration. It uses 1 munition and has an initial cooldown of 1 round, which means you can use it every round afterwards. It targets a friendly unit on the battlefield, and then for a number of rounds, that unit deals extra damage with range attacks against enemies that are standing on fire hexes, although affected Adeptus Sororitas units deal additional damage with all attacks instead. The Exorcist then deals 1 flame damage hit, which has a 25% pierce ratio and sets that hex on fire, to all enemies in the longest uninterrupted straight line originated from an enemy adjacent to the targeted friendly unit. And just to be clear on that last bit, it basically hits an enemy adjacent to your friendly unit, and then it continues in a straight line and hits every enemy it finds that is adjacent to the last enemy. The secondary ability is Devastating Refrain. It has an initial cooldown of 1 round, which means you can use it every round thereafter. This marks a hex on the battlefield and 3 additional hexes adjacent to it, but not to each other, in this pattern. At the beginning of the next turn, it deals 1 blast damage hit, which has a 15% pierce ratio, to all enemies on the marked hexes. And each enemy unit hit then has a chance to increase the crit chance and crit damage of any friendly units with the active faith trait, which currently is just all the Adeptus Sororitas characters. Try and use the primary ability on someone that has an enemy adjacent to it to make sure the Exorcist fires its flame line. The Exorcist works really well with Thousand Suns characters, as they can set fire to the ground and mostly use ranged attacks. And it's become a key part of the Neurothrope Guildraid team because of the Thousand Suns being part of that team. I'm going to go over Guildraid teams very soon, so make sure you hit that subscribe button to catch that video. Malleus rocket launcher is a field ordnance battery of the Astra Militarum faction. In lore, among the largest man-portable weapons fielded by the Astra Militarum are those crewed by ordnance teams. Such batteries are powerful assets, unleashing multiple warheads from their Malleus rocket launchers to vanquish the enemies of the Empire. The primary ability is Malleus Rocket Barrage. It uses 1 munition and has an initial cooldown of 1 round, which means you can use it every round thereafter. This is a simple one. It marks a hex on the battlefield, and then at the beginning of Malleus Rocket Launcher's next turn, it unleashes a barrage of missiles. 3 missiles impact on the marked hex, and 9 missiles impact in hexes adjacent to the target, with a maximum of 3 impacts per unit. Each impact deals blast damage, which has a 15% pierce attack, and all units hit get suppressed. And enemies hit within 2 hexes of the friendly Astra Militarum units can take extra damage from each hit. The secondary ability is Forward Spotter and has an initial cooldown of 2 rounds. Then it can be used every round after that. This summons a Cadian Guardsman in a hex adjacent to the targeted friendly unit, and the Cadian Guardsman immediately takes a turn. Get your Astra Militarum units in close and land that rocket barrage right on top of them. Units that are suppressed have their movement reduced by 1, deal less damage, and can't use Overwatch for 1 round, so use this on high profile targets to reduce their effectiveness. Enemy units that are controlled by AI have a tendency to chase summoned units around, so keep spawning in Cadian Guardsman summons to distract them. Galatian is a Redemptor Dreadnought of the Ultramarines faction. In lore, Redemptor Dreadnoughts are some of the largest of their kind ever fielded by the Adeptus Astartes. Armed to the teeth, they can be equipped to utterly destroy any kind of battlefield target with hails of solid shot, superheated plasma, or crushing Redemptor fists. And the primary ability is Duty Internal, and this costs a whopping 3 munitions and has an initial cooldown of 2 rounds. When you use it, you deploy Galatian as a stationary summon on the battlefield. He needs 3 hexes in order to be placed. He can't move, you can't control him. He has armor and health and can be killed, but he has a 5-hit power damage melee attack that has a 40% pierce ratio. He also has a 2-range, 6-hit projectile ranged attack that has a 15% pierce ratio. He has the big target, mechanical, Overwatch, and vehicle traits, and he gets a new ability that replaces his second ability, and it's called Ancient Fury, and this sees his melee attacks deal damage to any adjacent enemies to his target or Galatian himself, so he just swings around hitting things. It also lets his ranged attack hit any adjacent enemies to his targets, as well as anything exactly 2 hexes away from Galatian, even if that's behind him. So quite frankly, he becomes an awesome dreadnought in the middle of the battlefield. His secondary ability is Macro Plasma Incinerator and has an initial cooldown of 1 round, then it can be used every round after that. This marks a target hex and the 2 hexes behind it for 1 round. You can see the pattern here. Then, as soon as an enemy finishes their movement on it, Galatian deals 3 hit plasma damage, which has a 65% pierce ratio, all enemies in the marked area. Make sure that you place him in an area where he's going to be able to reach enemies. The easiest way to avoid him is just to step out of his 2-hex range because he can't move anywhere. Don't place him in front of guild raid bosses that charge, like Gazgul or Rogel Dorn tank, because he's going to be instantly killed by them. And he has become a big part of the Admech guild raid team because he's also mechanical and can re-trigger Exeter Row to hit more times, but is also re-triggered himself by Actus and Tangida. Biovore is an artillery organism at the Tyranids faction. In lore, these living artillery pieces nurture a clutch of spore mines within their bodies. After anchoring themselves to the ground with their chitinous spurs, the creatures fire their living ammunition in high arcs into the midst of the foe, where it detonates with sudden violence. The primary ability is Bio Minefield. It uses 1 munition and has an initial cooldown of 2 rounds, which means you can use it every round thereafter. This targets an enemy on the battlefield, and if there are 3 or more spore mines on the battlefield already, all spore mines immediately take a turn, moving towards the target if possible. Otherwise, it summons 3 spore mines in free hexes adjacent to the target. Spore mines have health, they can be killed, but if they take a turn while adjacent to an enemy, they explode, dealing 1 hit of toxic damage that has a 70% pierce ratio. So these things can really hurt you once they're leveled up. The secondary ability is Spore Mines Launcher. This has no cooldown at all and can be fired in the first round and every round after that. This simply summons a spore mine onto a target-free hex on the battlefield that is not adjacent to an enemy. The spore mine will then start moving towards the enemy until it's killed or explodes. These spores are amazing at confusing enemy AI, who will run off and try and kill them. They are also great at controlling the movement of guild raid bosses like Mortarion, Zarek, or Avatar, because they won't move onto them, and if you fire them off at the edge of the battlefield, you can then have a lot of them hit at the same time, and that does a ridiculous amount of damage to units. The last machine of war we will talk about today is Forgefiend, a demon engine of the Black Legion faction. In lore, Forgefiends are fused with enormous rotary cannons and ancient artifact ordnance perverted to vomit ectoplasma from the beast's own innards. With such weaponry, they scythe down masses of enemy troops and blast glowing craters into the toughest opposition. Their primary ability is Hade's autocannons, and this uses 1 munition and has no cooldown, so it can be fired in the first round and every round thereafter. This deals 6 flame damage hits which have 25% pierce ratio and sets the target hexes on fire. It targets enemy summons only, as well as all other enemy summons within 2 hexes of your target enemy summon. It can also deal a lot of crit damage if those crit. The secondary ability is Demonic Ordnance. This sets a target hex and the 2 hexes behind it on fire, so that means it's the same pattern as Galatian's Macroplasma Incinerator, which makes it easier to remember. If one of those hexes is already on fire, it deals 3 plasma damage hits, which have a 65% pierce ratio to all enemies on them. This can also deal a chunk of crit damage when it crits. And the reason I'm talking about crit damage is because the Forgefiend's crit chance for both abilities is increased every time Demonic Ordnance is used during a battle. But after the Forgefiend causes 3 or more critical hits during its turn, it cannot cause any more critical hits for the remainder of the battle. Make sure you're using Demonic Ordnance each time to power up your crit chance. Once it's used all its crit chance, you can see that the Forgefiend turns black, so you know that it can't crit anymore, but can still fire as normal. Use fire to block hexes and separate enemy characters from each other. Units have to stop when they enter a fire hex, and they receive 20% of their initial health as flame damage if they start their turn on it. So, as you've seen today, the Machines of War are incredible support units that you really should be picking up. I usually split them up into 2 main types, the ones that are really focused on helping their own faction, and the ones that are more general and can be used by all factions. Tson'ji, Plagueburst Crawler, and to a certain extent Exorcist and Malleus Rocket Launcher are the ones that really boost their own factions, while the rest are really faction agnostic and work well in every team. I don't think there's a best Machine of War though, but the faction agnostic ones are definitely more versatile than the others, and so those 3, Forgefiend, Biovore, and Galatian, are the ones I would recommend to prioritise first. My own personal favourite is easily Galatian, because I just love the idea of having this giant dreadnought turning the tide of battle by being this incredible presence in the middle of a melee scrum. So from everything that you've heard today, which one sounds like your favourite? Let me know in the comments below, or if you have any questions about them, then do ask, as I do read and answer every comment possible.